I'm sure that I don't need to be the one to tell you that the price of everything has gone up recently. The price of gas, groceries, and yes, avocados has gone way up lately. And earlier this week, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released a report that kind of helps to explain it all. And the price of things just continue to rise despite the global pandemic and one of the biggest job shortages we've ever seen. So are businesses taking advantage of the consumer here, or is there something else going on? In this video, we'll be discussing exactly why everything is going up in price so rapidly. In addition, we'll be discussing exactly how we got to this point and what might be coming in the future. So if you like this video, make sure to smash that thumbs up button below and hit that notification bell too. That way YouTube can show our videos to other money minds around the world. Before we dive in here, it's important to mention that the price of things is always going to go up. Like before the pandemic, if there was ever such a time, it might cost you around $20 to $30 to go see a movie. Plus, that's not all bad. 20-30 bucks to go see a movie, that's pretty standard. But if you tell that to your parents or grandparents, that price may seem a bit crazy. That's because when your grandparents were kids, it might only cost 25 cents for a movie ticket and a popcorn. Is the movie industry just trying to rip you off? Well, not exactly. You see, it's not just the movie industry. As time goes on, almost every industry in the world has had to increase prices to some degree. This is what's known as inflation, and inflation is just the steady rise in the price of goods and services over time. So even though the goods that you're actually buying aren't really much different than 20 or 30 years ago, the price will certainly be different. And inflation can affect just specific industries, or it can affect an entire economy all at once. Typically, when inflation happens very rapidly, it's often temporary as well. So for instance, supply and demand issues can cause temporary inflation. If you have an item that's high in demand but short in supply, then the price of that item is going to go way up. This is because it's very rare to buy that item, and a lot of people actually want it. This type of phenomenon could last for a long time, but as soon as you have the demand and the supply equal, then the prices should level out as well. That's because there's now enough supply for every person in the market. So there really shouldn't be any reason for prices to continue to increase, at least for supply and demand. Other factors that can contribute to inflation within a market could be the actual cost to produce the item, delivery fees, worker pay, and how many people actually want the item. Because if not that many people want it, the price of it's not going to be that high either. So that's an individual market, but like I said at the start, everything seems to be going up in price right now. We've been talking about this a lot at the Minority Mindset, as more and more people are wondering if this level of inflation is going to rise or if it's just temporary. And the truth is, if I had a magic crystal ball, I'd tell you exactly what's going to happen, but the fact is I just don't. Nobody really knows what direction this whole inflation thing is going to take, but there are a few things we can take a look at. This brings us back to the Bureau of Labor Statistics report that I mentioned earlier. Every so often, the Bureau of Labor Statistics will release a report called the Consumer Price Index. And the Consumer Price Index details consumer spending and, more importantly, the prices. So for instance, and I'm just going to read from my computer here because I don't have these numbers memorized, consumer prices in August rose by 5.3%. That's a comparison from about a year ago, and consumer prices alone increased by 0.3% for the month of August. On a regular year, consumer prices or inflation may only rise by around 2 to 3%. So you're definitely not crazy to think that prices are going way up, way fast right now. And there are a ton of different reasons why inflation is rising so fast right now. But the important thing to mention is this is not just one industry going up, it's the entire economy going up. One of the biggest reasons inflation is rising so fast right now is because of all the money the US printed as stimulus last year. Around 25% of all of the US dollars ever printed were printed last year. That equates to around $5 trillion, and love it or hate it, that money's already printed. And with more money in circulation, we now have a big supply and demand problem. The more money there actually is in circulation, the less demand there is for people to actually get it. That's because ultimately it's much easier to come by. But on the flip side, we also have a big supply of money as well. That means the actual buying power of your money goes way down. Like, think of it this way. If there was only $100 available in the US economy and you had $1, that's pretty good, right? You're currently holding on to 1% of all of the money available. But if the US economy suddenly says, you know what, $100 isn't enough, we need $200. So Uncle Sam calls up Jerome Powell of the Fed and makes that money printer go burr, and then all of a sudden, we have $200. But you still only have $1, so while you didn't lose any money, you actually have less money than you did before. $1 won't take you nearly as far as it could before, as you'll need $2 in order to buy all the same things. Well, that's basically what we did. Stimulus checks and unemployment programs pumped so much money into the economy, And like I said, love it or hate it, that money is out there now. And I can already tell what you're thinking. Doesn't that just mean more people will have money, and if prices stay the same, can't more people buy more things? Well, yeah, if people had way more money to spend and prices remained exactly the same, people could buy more things. But unfortunately, it's a lot more complicated than that. You see, as more people buy things, the supply of items will eventually go down. That means in order to meet demand, companies are going to have to produce more things. And more often than not, they won't be able to do that for free. Increasing anything will come at a cost. So in order to make more, companies will have to spend more. And if they have to spend more, eventually they'll trickle that cost down to you, the consumer. But stimulus programs aren't the only reason why things are so expensive right now. When the pandemic first started back in March of 2020, pretty much the whole world shut down. Schools and offices were able to continue at home. But factories where the production happens and goods are made can't exactly work from home. So as factories were closed around the world, that meant things couldn't get made. And if things couldn't get made, that means the supply of things couldn't be replenished. That created a months-long backlog in the supply chain. And even today, we're just now getting caught up as suppliers are having a really hard time keeping things on shelves. Our demand is high, but our supply of things is really low. And unfortunately, this inflation issue doesn't end there. The last batch of stimulus checks was sent out back in March of this year. The eviction moratorium has now ended, and special unemployment assistance is ending too. Which means Americans are now faced with price increases on everything in goods and services and having to pay for everything for themselves 100%. Which means the cost of living is going to also increase. And workers are going to demand to be paid more to actually meet that new cost of living. This is one of the biggest reasons why right now, even though we're in a pandemic and prices are rising, we're also in one of the biggest labor shortages we've ever seen. Americans aren't receiving the raises that they feel that they deserve, so they're actually quitting their jobs and going out and searching for jobs that are going to pay them more. And this type of phenomenon could lead to one of two things happening. Companies will have to start increasing wages to actually meet that cost of living, or they'll have to start getting very creative about how things get done. Technology is booming across the world, and nowadays jobs that don't require a specialty are often being replaced by machines. So in the short term, you may see a ton of different companies actually increase wages, but in the long term, a lot of these jobs that people have may be replaced by technology. On the flip side, if nothing is done about this issue, you may see a lot of small businesses or even large businesses crash and fail. And depending on the scope and the industry or the actual companies that fail, the government may need to bail them out and offer more stimulus, which will eventually make the price of things rise even more again. Like I said earlier, I don't have a crystal ball and I can't tell you exactly when this inflation problem is going to end. Certain things will probably get better, like demand will eventually level off and our supply will eventually rise for certain items. But it could be years before that happens. Other factors like wages and stimulus could be around for a long time as well, and let's be honest, as long as this pandemic is here, pretty much anything could happen. It's like we always say, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. In the meantime, prices will continue to rise throughout the country. And while it appears as if inflation did cool off a little bit over the summer, prices are still insanely high and the cost of things are still very much higher than they were back before the pandemic. But what exactly do you think about inflation? Do you think it's here to stay at this current rate, or do you think it'll start to drop over the next several months? Let me know your thoughts on this issue and make sure to join the conversation below before you go. If you want to learn ways to actually beat inflation and want to make sure that the price of things going up does not affect your wallet, our team wrote an article on this exact topic on theminoritymindset.com, and I'll link it for you in the description below. But that is it for today's Business and Financial Breakdown. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.